Welcome to Rawcast AD. Doug here. This week, for some reason, I was reminiscing and remembered that I had two now defunct and abandoned blogs out there. Won't even tell you the addresses right now because those are my little treasures. Since, writing like 8 or 9 blog posts and then not following up on it, you're never going to gain a following. But it's interesting because this goes along with things that I've been talking about all along in this rendition of Rawcast. Remember, there was the first 25 episodes of the yesteryears. So if you want to jump back to see how things used to be, that's all the power to you, man. Person, all the power to you. Now, if you want more cheap haha and less self-awareness, I won't blame you. Go on, get it. But I thought it would be fun to look back on the old blogs. And holy shit, what a surprise. I was kind of doing the same thing that I'm doing with this, which is like my own version of therapy, where I'm self-aware enough that in reminiscing, I'm able to see things that maybe my mind developed a slightly altered memory to help it fit easier within my head. But holy shit, people. One of the blogs, I don't know why, I just, at the time, it is quite obvious that what I would do is write down the idea. Basically get the blunt, concise, to the point, no frills emotion on the page. And then I would upload them as rough drafts. I mean, yeah, I'd look through for typos, but holy shit, should I have gone back and expanded the ideas? It's actually embarrassing for me. I thought it'd be fun to hey, so where was I at? Especially after realizing it was more so talking about mental health, and apparently that's just never changed with me. In looking back on them, I thought it would be fun to read them and see, how I feel about those situations or how it compares up to 3 or 4 years later. But no. Most of it is not something I would really want to read. It's such rough ideas that, maybe I can class it up, maybe add profanity as sentence enhancers to make it a little spicier for your ear holes. But no, I'm doing the butts again. However, there was one from December 30th, 2017. And I want to revisit this one. I'm going to read all but the last paragraph. And I'll say right now that the last paragraph doesn't even make sense with the story. It's like it's an abrupt ending to get myself off the hot seat I put myself on for my own purposes. For myself. And most of this blog seems like it was almost written in desperation just to be spit the ideas out there and just be done with it. But this one, I want to revisit because it's called personal fear. And that's a topic that I'm going to focus on in this episode. And so here is the blog post that I wrote from December 30th of 2017 under a name that has nothing to do with Rawcast. Fear is an uncomfortable topic. As far as I know, we all have fears. Despite this, discussing personal fears can be almost taboo. Oh, it kind of goes along with the whole mental health thing, huh? That was an added. I'm also giving you the director's cut with the commentary. Maybe it's because fears vocalized express weakness or they cause us to feel vulnerable. Regardless of the reasoning, I'm here to share a personal fear. Some of you may find this fear to be a silly notion, and if you do, hopefully this will at least be entertaining for you. One of my deepest fears is the cube. And it's so cheeky. I also included a picture of the Tesseract without permission. No, not that cube. What I fear is the office cubicle. The dull box once fueled my nightmares. I cringe when I think about having to spend 9 hours of my day trapped inside that evil device of workplace productivity. I understand that it is merely a workstation. But for some reason, when I'm forced to work in a cubicle, it feels as though my soul is being poisoned. This is probably due to the fact that the offices of my employment have always consisted of drab, gray cubicles. I was encouraged to decorate my workspace to make it feel more like home, but for me, decorating was just the act of putting on a Band-Aid to treat cancer. Putting up photos of my family only made it feel like a prison cell. It seemed more adequate to scratch tally marks into the thin padding of the partitions to indicate the number of days I'd served for my sentence. It didn't matter what I did to personalize the cubicle, it was always just a box. In the back of my mind, subconscious voices would remind me that I would spend my life working in this box, only to be placed in a smaller box when my time in this realm of existence ended. Perhaps it's some phobia. Not claustrophobia, mind you. In no way was I demanding a corner office with a view. In fact, I had no demands in regards to workspace in these offices. I just loathed those damn boxes. Enough time spent working in a cubicle inevitably led to nightmares. I dreamed that as I entered the cubicle each morning, a fourth wall would rise up out of the floor and all four would rise to the ceiling, trapping me inside. Oftentimes, I'd find that my office chair was bolted to the floor and eventually shackles had appeared to keep me at my desk. The nightmare that resonated with me the most deepened my hatred for that cubicle. I approached my cubicle one morning and decided not to enter. Instead, I tried to casually make my way to the exit, deciding to flee this nightmare. I didn't make any progress. The office simply expanded, creating the effect of housing thousands and thousands of these horrible boxes as far as the eye could see. This was the worst of the series of nightmares. In previous dreams, the fourth wall would eventually disappear and the shackles would release me at quitting time. Once outside the dreaded cube, I knew that I would be free. But when the office expanded into perceived infinity, I had no hopes of freedom. I only escaped this fear-filled land of the mundane by waking up. For most, cubicles are just a place to do their work. But to me, cubicles are soul-sucking death boxes. I will do everything I can to ensure I never have to work in one again. It wasn't the series of awful dreams that made me fear the workplace prison. The dreams were definitely a subconscious creation of how working in them made me feel on a daily basis. I think we will spend enough time in boxes when we're dead. Life is too beautiful to work in a cubicle. And that's where I'm going to end that. There is one more paragraph to that blog post, but it's a lie. I once shared that blog post, which I should not have done it with its juvenile nature. Really needed some proofreading, a little extra thought, a little more time to round out the edges and present a full concept, a well-rounded idea. But I didn't do that. I did have a writer friend of mine read the blog post, and he said that the last paragraph just seemed too abrupt. It didn't make sense. And it really freaked me out that he called that out at the time, because the last paragraph of that blog did not make sense. I realized I wrote myself into a corner where I was going to have to deal with the personal truth. Air out my dirty laundry, had a skeleton in the closet that I did not feel comfortable sharing at the time. So there was an abrupt ending. And it's funny, I wrote that blog post almost 3 years ago. At the time, I thought I was deathly afraid of the cube. From a psychological standpoint, somebody might say that it was claustrophobia. But it was more of an identity issue with me. I had completely lost my cool from that job hopping where I was, like in the last episode, talked about how I was switching hats and uniforms and blah, 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 blah. I never gave myself the time to plant roots. I was a scorched earth. I'd pop in. This was what I was doing. And when I left, it was an almost embarrassing way. I wasn't proud of who I was. And so at the time, of course, I thought that working in a cubicle was a fear. But that was just a little bit of a burp of the truth that needed to be addressed by myself. You know, just a little gas bubble coming up, and I'm like, oh, it's a cubicle. I can't stand a cubicle, can't stand a cubicle. No, I just didn't see the signs at the time. I do find it amazing that I held on to these blogs because it does let me look back, as embarrassing as it can be. But the separation of time between my thoughts then and now, a lot of life has taken place, and I'm able to approach my previous self with a different perspective. Dare I say, a more refined perspective. I'm not necessarily more refined. I just lived a little bit more. Okay, fine, we'll go with refined. I have a very hard time, boosting my confidence. Going back to the sales thing for just a moment. Yeah, when that ego gets totally inflated, watch the fuck out. Took some strategic ego death for me to become more humble and compassionate. But we know some of those tales. Do you like how these just half-twisted threads find their way back into every episode? It's like every episode is just a redo of the previous episode, isn't it? Oh, man. Starting to freak me out. But no, it wasn't just a fear. Because like I brought up my shoes in the last episode, I put purpose in each pair of shoes I have. But at the end of the day, I am not my shoes. Yeah, I don't like working in a cubicle, but my thoughts on that have changed. A workspace is a workspace. I mean, cubicles are the least enjoyable, but I don't fear them. Do I much rather working on the open road? Most of the year. But it's not a fear of the cubicle. It was just that I was leading myself to the promise of riches, a higher paycheck, and not thinking about what line of work would allow me to feel better about my life, allow me to add meaning to my life. Holy shit, guys, it's almost like he's getting coherent enough that he's building upon the ideas from last time. No, it's a fluke. Do I want to go back to working in a cubicle? No, not necessarily. It feels too much like a kennel. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a prison anymore. It is just a workstation. I am not my cubicle. I am not my work. I am not my shoes. In any and all situations, I need to be me. I'm going to be me. So to blow up discomfort with a workstation was just me putting the focus once more in the wrong place. Thinking, I hate working in a cubicle. It's killing me inside. I need to get the fuck out of here. No. Relax. You didn't like the job. It wasn't the cubicle. What you were doing didn't interest you in the slightest. It wasn't benefiting anybody. It wasn't helping anybody. So that was my problem. I was, for all those years, I was careening out of control without knowing about it, thinking that I was jumping up, the financial ladder, when really I was just blindfolded, spinning around a bat and trying to run to first base. Bet you didn't think it was going there. But so having said all that, like I think it's neat that I was able to go back and look at, where my thoughts were at the time. And I'm not going to call myself stupid. That's how I felt at the time. Sure, it was a little naive. It was a little misguided. But I know much more now than I did back then. Is it embarrassing? A little bit. But here I am talking to you about it. I mean, I fucking read that little piece of history. I'm almost glad that it didn't somehow blow up, because that could have been going horribly wrong for other reasons and exacerbated other mental issues at the time. But it did give me a chuckle. It's nice to be able to recognize how I see things differently, to be self-aware enough to know how my perspectives changed. And that I feel like I'm starting to figure it out. The entire purpose being the growing as a person and living the best me that I can, to be the best me for my loved ones. But it did make me think, if that's what I thought was a fear back then, what are my fears now? And it's hard for me to say. I don't know if it's just because I'm in too much of an altruistic or even somewhat like a sprinkling of stoicism in there. But I wouldn't necessarily say fear. I don't fear anything, really. I made the mistake of... I told you that I had been reading Irvin Yalom's books through audiobook format. Those were recommended to me by my friend Jordan Dennison. The first one I read was Love's Executioner. Loved it. And unfortunately, all my Amazon account stuff is tied up to my credit card, which is frozen because there was fraud on it. So that got shut down. And with how I do my budget, I don't want to be pulling directly. Now, this is going to make me sound like I'm running up a credit card. Not the case, not the case. But my spontaneous Audible purchase here and there needs to be factored in. And so I do that through the credit card side. And this is such a dumb-ass story. Like, I'm surprised anybody's still awake listening to this. But so I had finished Love's Executioner. I'm downloading some books that are included with Audible because I know that I can't purchase the next couple books in line that I want to. And I saw that Staring at the Sun by Irvin Yalom was included with Audible. So I started on that one, and that one's about death anxiety. Doesn't necessarily relate, like it hasn't hit me hard yet, but I'm only 45 minutes to an hour into it. But this was the one that my friend Jordan told me that it was a pretty heavy topic to start off with, so I saved it for my second book. But it's very interesting. But right now, with where I'm at, my understanding of my own anxiety triggers and stuff like that, like, do I fear the possibility of losing any of my loved ones? Yes. If you haven't been listening to the podcast, back in March, had multiple grandparents die. That's grandparents. I get it's a little bit different, but I loved every one of them. I don't love them a little bit less because of, the generational divide or the gap or difference in age. None of that shit. Family's family. You know what I'm talking about, fam? But, if I really sit down and dwell and think about that, If you dwell within too long, it's going to be despair, despair, despair. So yeah, I could definitely open up a can of anxiety thinking too much about the possibility of losing a loved one. Do I fear that happening? Yes, but I don't dwell on it because death is inevitable. It's one thing that we all have in common. One day we will all die. So that may be a fear that's been thought through, and I am going to revisit through staring at the sun. I kind of look forward to it, but I have a feeling that at some point it's going to be a punch to the gut. It might be a bit of a mind fuck. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm steeling my mind so that I'm prepared for any possible self-realization that comes from it. But other than that, I can't think of too many fears. Do I fear personally dying? Well, no, not necessarily. And my spiritual sense, placing faith in the divine is a way that some people can cope with the idea of death. For where I'm at right now, and have been for quite some time, is that this husk will be left behind and my energy will be recycled back into the universe. To what degree or fashion or form, I don't necessarily know. But the only way to find that out is to cease. And so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But fear. That is not to say that I'm fearless, but I'm in a good enough place that I'm able to manage my anxiety so that these fears I can acknowledge. It's like taking you on a tour of my house and we go through the trophy room of fear. It's, yep, those are my fears. They remain well polished. I acknowledge that they're there. I make sure to keep it clean so that it's not going to cause an allergic reaction when there's too much dust. But as far as any phobias or actual fears that I have right now, no, I'm pretty good. Sometimes it is good to fear. So when we're looking into the news, like we've talked about before, fear and anxiety, those are the primary drivers that keep you tuned in. Unplugging from that allowed me to keep my anxiety in check much better than I've been able to in the past. I feel like I'm ahead of the curve. And so I'm going to enjoy this ride for what it is right now, because the future is going to have a whole slew of fears that I have not yet encountered, that I've not yet thought of, that I have yet to process. But we'll come to those bridges when we cross them. If you're somebody that's dealing with anxiety, you have to try to figure out what triggers them. And I'm not suggesting you just figure this shit out on your own. If you have the option to go to therapy, for the love of all that is unholy, please do, and take it seriously. This is for your own well-being. I'm somebody who really can't afford it. So I'm forced to reach out, pick the nuggets of truth, the nuggets of self-help that I can pull from the air, and have been kind enough to have a friend point me in the right direction to give me that brain food that I need to nourish my mind and soul. It's feeling good. I'm still riding that high. Over a week later, I'm still riding it, baby. Woo! We'll control those highs or it'll crash. No, I'm just messing. But yeah, this has just been a weird look down memory lane to talk about that particular fear of the cubicle. And I held that tight. I kept that logged in the back room of my mind where it's just like, we've talked, my coworkers and I have talked about looking for other jobs. And when I hear, oh, yeah, well, that one, you're going to work in a cubicle, I'm like, yeah, not interested. But it wasn't until I came across my old blog and actually read that post that I was like, ooh, I'd like to do an episode about fear. And this was supposed to be an episode where I actually talk to you about my current fears. But I need to get some truth off my chest and before I can even tell you the one little fear that I have. And it's a small thing. Not necessarily small. But I had a warped sense of reality on it. Do you like how I spent all this time basically telling you how I don't have a fear? Or how I at least keep my fears in check? Here's some real truth for you. I still use chewing tobacco. We all know the dangers of tobacco use. I'm not going to talk about the financial side of it. I've cut back 50%. I really don't spend much money on chewing. But every time I put a dip in my mouth, I remember that my gums have receded from chewing. And that one of these days, I did have one dream about this. It was a very brief dream, and it wasn't even a total nightmare. It was almost an aside. Where I was just in a dream, and then out of nowhere, put a dip in, and then I heard a crack, felt a pop. Heard and felt. Go ahead and mix match those, whichever way you want to go. And then two of my teeth fell out. And so, yes, this is a fear of mine. That I'm going to keep poisoning myself through chewing tobacco until there's no turning back. And notice that I talk about losing a tooth over the fears of cancer. It's not that I have mixed up priorities, but I believe that that was my subconscious mind going about it the nice way in my dream. Like, hey, if you don't quit this shit, you'll lose a tooth, rather than me being in an oncologist's office saying, you got the big C, pal. And so, yeah, this was supposed to be a whole episode talking about fear because my old blog made me think of that. But in sitting down to process this all, it ended up being more about how time bridged. You're able to, into the past, you're able to see how your perspective has changed, how your mentality has changed. And if your mentality hasn't changed, I would get to working on that. If you've got anxiety, work on figuring out what your triggers are. And if everything freaking triggers you, you better have your ass in therapy soon. You need to start unraveling the mysteries there so you can wrap your head around yourself and live a better life for yourself. Make yourself better for the life you want to live. And then to tell you some real hard truths here. You know, I'm doing the regular exercise regimen. I cut way back on drinking. I've been sober for an entire week. And again, I'm not the guy that shows up to work. I never was the guy that shows up to work drunk. I'm not drunk right now either, guys and gals. As I tell you that, yes, I actually did show up to work at UPS drunk a couple times. There was only 3 times, and it was 3 separate incidents where we were having too good of a time, lost track of time, and went, oh shit, we got to get to work. And so a group of us ended up going to work. God, stories for another time. Stories for another time. That'll be story night. One day I should just clean out my closet on the recording and tell you all of the fucked up things that I've done in the past. But no, I'm not the I'm not the type to purposely do, like, I don't need alcohol. I can see how I was setting up the precursor to alcoholism, but I was more or less on a bit of a bender. The work came first, the kids came first, the house came first. It's not like I was drunk all the time. It's not like I was even that drunk. It was just that I was consuming more alcohol than I usually would, and it was enough that at least one of my eyebrows was raised up during the process. I was at least half aware all the time of like, hey, why'd you just grab a beer? It's like 3 p.m. But so I talked about that. I'm working on it, and by working on it, all I do is just go, hey, just say no. Because we all know that campaign worked so fucking well. But that's actually what I did. I'm like, I should grab a beer. No, you shouldn't. You're just trying to numb yourself because you're bored right now. So you're bored right now, get your fucking house cleaning shoes on, bitch. Get the fuck up and clean something. So I'm making those strides. But now my newest focus needs to be quitting the chewing tobacco, because the underlying issue, which my subconscious, again, was kind enough to focus on the tooth to like just give me that little, like at a comedy club when they give you the light when you're running close to your time. That was my subconscious saying, hey, if you don't quit this shit, you're going to lose a tooth. But it was a wake-up call. And I don't even particularly like chewing. I catch myself. The days where I go pleh and take it out and put a new one in, and 10 minutes later go, did I really just fucking do that? That's when you know you're not self-aware enough about your physical actions that you need to take preventive measures. And so it's been a long time since I actually tried to quit chewing. And I'm going cold turkey, using nicotine gum, stuff like that. It isn't real enough to me to be a real aid in my struggle to overcome the nicotine addiction. So I'm going to start researching, some processes that I can try now to alleviate myself of this nicotine addiction and live a physically healthier lifestyle just by cutting that fucking toxin out of my life. And that's all I got to say on the subject right now. Hopefully in the near future, on future episodes, I'll be able to share with you my progress on kicking that nicotine habit. But until then, have a good one. And See, I fuck it up right there. I hope you guys enjoy these fuck ups. I'm not trying to play it off as if I'm smooth. I'm just a meat-headed Midwesterner. Just a good old lad from the central Wisconsin, I tell ya. But what I was going to say was, Rawcast has hoped you would enjoy it. I fucked it up again. I was going to make fun of the Audible ending. Audible has hoped you have enjoyed this program. That's what I was trying to say. But I fucked up my outro so fucking blatantly, even on a second attempt. No blooper reel with Rawcast because we keep it in the episode. This is where I just fall back and say it is called Rawcast. Don't expect the edges to be sanded down or the polish to be applied, because this has been an episode of Rawcast AD.